On the surgical options, those are already banned for anyone 17 and under. So it's really on hormone drugs and puberty blockers. But I want to zero in on the educational issues, because Amelia Newbert and Randy Boissonneau both said this is the thing that scares them, that teachers will in fact be required to out kids to their parents. What are your thoughts on that?
It's egregious. You know, we know that it's not acceptable to write a letter home when a kid comes out as gay at school, and it's no different to allow that for trans kids. These are kids who just want the freedom to be themselves, and they're seeing a government that is going to force them back in the closet and actually put them at further risk of harm.
What do you say to parents, though, who, love their kids, want the best for their kids, and want to be told when their kids are making big life-changing choices, like changing their name, like changing their pronoun? I know it's not at the level of the surgeries, but, a lot of parents would want to know about that. What do you say to them?
Absolutely. We know the overwhelming majority of parents support their kids, and that's increasingly true for parents of trans kids. But we know that's not the case for everyone. We know that some kids either aren't ready or don't feel comfortable coming out at home. And in those cases, those kids deserve some space to figure themselves out. And a teacher in these situations, they would work with that kid to figure out if there is a concern or a worry to make sure that that kid is supported. But we should not be mandating parent notification, because it puts kids at risk and denies them that freedom.
Okay, so when it comes to the role of parental involvement, you can see how a kid would go to school and want to change the name they use and the gender they use, and a mom and a dad or whatever the family makeup is not know about it. When it comes to the medical treatments, that's a different issue. And this policy is proposing banning puberty blockers for children aged 15 and under. Help me understand the significance of that for a trans kid who wants to use that medical service.
It's important to begin by understanding that there's long wait lists to access these services in the first place. So kids who access puberty blockers or hormones go through years of struggle and discomfort, and then they are assessed routinely by qualified physicians and healthcare providers. It is dangerous for any government to interfere in the provision of evidence-based healthcare, especially to do so for ideological purposes. When we stop kids from getting access to the care they need, when it comes to trans young folks, we're putting them down a path that there is actually no reversing from. They're going to go through a puberty that will actually exacerbate their harm. And I know that that's hard for most folks to understand. Not everyone's a trans person. Our experiences are different. But the visceral pain that these young people feel when they're denied access to life-changing medication is something that we can't discount.
Explain that harm to me. Look, I'm a 50-year-old straight white guy. You know what I mean? But explain that harm to me. Is it because their body is changing in a way that if it isn't interfered with the drugs, that they don't identify with, and that's the pain? Is that what you're talking about there?
So it's what we call gender dysphoria, and it's different for everybody. It's different for different trans folks, but it is often a visceral discomfort or dissonance between who they know they are and the path their body is going. Right. And trans folks have existed forever, right? This isn't new. We've seen this phenomena for ages, and interventions like hormone replacement therapy have been around for decades as well, and are actually a very well-researched intervention.
So this is now the third province that we've seen move on this, with New Brunswick, then Saskatchewan, and now Alberta. A lot of people have said this is the most restrictive one. Now, we haven't seen the implementation plan. We've seen the high-level policy proposals from Premier Smith. How do you see the Alberta one compared to what we saw in Saskatchewan and New Brunswick?
It's the worst that we've seen, and I would argue that it's an introduction of an American playbook that has led to queer people and trans people having to flee certain states. We're seeing not just an attack on the freedom of trans kids to be themselves, we're seeing state interference in evidence-based healthcare. We're seeing a whole generation of trans kids who aren't going to be able to participate in sport anymore. Before I came out as trans, I played 12 years of boys hockey in small towns across this country. I loved that experience. Imagine not being legally allowed to participate in sport. And she might say there's going to be these gender-neutral leagues. That's not going to actually happen in practice. They float this as an idea, but we already have underspending and underinvestment in women's sport. We're not going to create a whole new league, and so these kids aren't going to have an option.
You say it could drive them from the province the way we've seen this in the States. I mean, what is it in particular that makes this so extreme? Is it the healthcare intervention from your perspective? Because you heard Premier Smith, I'm sure today, that she says she doesn't want people to make life-altering permanent choices until they're, basically old enough to vote.
So again, this is actually, it's about the kids, but it's also about the families. In many cases, those families are supportive, and they are working with a physician to get these kids access to the care they need. Now imagine knowing your kid's suffering every day, but actually are no longer able to access those services. Of course you're going to look at other options, and so we will see in some cases folks leaving the province because they're not able to access the universal public health care that those kids need.
Is there a way to come up with some sort of a policy framework that balances what is being framed as the competing interests of the parents and the child? You know, like you've gone through this, you have lived this. Is there something governments can do that makes it safe for people who might be going through the journey you've gone through and the parents who may not know how to deal with that?
The irony is that is actually exactly what we've had. You know, there was no example in either of any of these provinces of failings in the existing approach and existing policy. We had a policy that was nuanced, that allowed teachers to work with parents and young folks to help folks come out if and when they're ready. We have established practices that health providers are already bound by, where they have to make sure that these are interventions undertaken with support from family and that it is the right intervention. And so my worry here is this is Danielle Smith shoring up support on the more fringe, radical elements of her base, and she's using parental rights to cue an anti-trans and anti-gay agenda that will lead, in an environment where we're already seeing more hate, to more people being harassed, more kids being bullied, and more homeless trans kids at the end of the day.
Fae Johnstone, the Executive Director of Queer Momentum, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.